Welcome to week 15 running backs here with Jim McCormick, who was brought to my attention then in our last video, the quarterbacks. I called Khalil Mack, Shelvin Mack. I have been juggling two sports. This is my third recording today. I've recorded NFL, I've recorded NBA. So I'm going to consider that one a moral victory, Jim.
I agree. Like I said, Melvin Gordon Hayward. So.
Exactly. So if I start calling people basketball players' names, just recognize the last name is who I was going for, because my mind is all over the place. Before we get started talking and mispronouncing guys' names and calling them the wrong name for the running back position, let me talk to you about this promotion we got going on at rotocurve.com. rotocurve.com/big-game. You get tickets to Big Game 51, which of course is the end of the NFL season. Win free tickets plus fan experience events, 4-night trip to Houston, 2 tickets to the Big Game February 5th, upgraded VIP tickets to the Antonio Brown celebrity game, $800 airfare credit, all you can eat tailgate, which sounds fantastic right now. I've still not had lunch. Prime Sports Club pregame party with Joe Montana and Warren Moon. Jim, who do you like at running back this week? Because I don't think it's possible to go both Le'Veon and David Johnson this week.
No,
with their prices, I mean, you're going 4,000 at all the other positions. It's just not worth it. What do you like doing at running back on first look? Because it's an interesting week.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to fade those guys, right? So you want to get one of them in theory. So if you're going to do that, I prefer Bell based on the price is comparable. He's a little bit cheaper on DraftKings. But just the volume. I mean, he's averaging 7 more carries per game over the last 5 weeks than any other player in football. The volume is just ridiculous, obviously. And this isn't just chasing last week's points. It's just chasing the volume in general, right? I mean, he's a total yardage monster. I think he's in the company of Jim Brown and Priest Holmes for the only guys to ever average, 160 total, yards per scrimmage through 10 games. We can, the historic measures are all there. And David Johnson chasing history as well. So you're talking about 2 just absolute scrimmage monsters here. The differentiating factor for me with Bell is just the sheer volume of the running game. I just think it's there more. And the passing usage is similar. So that's the edge, I guess, and also, both teams face, the Saints aren't good against the run, but either the Bengals. The Bengals have given up the 10th most yards to running backs, and they really don't have. Geno Atkins is kind of an undersized tackle. They don't really have a run stuffer in there. They're not that kind of line. They're kind of a swarm and hit kind of team. I still think Bell, and more importantly, he's projected for what 28, 29 fantasy points. 28, 29 touches. With a ceiling that's not too off of his projection, 36, 37 points. It's obviously higher than that even because we saw it last week. But, yeah, Bell's my guy. You can't go wrong with Johnson. I can't really tell you why you would fade either of these guys, right? They're both in great positions. I do think there's an argument to be made if you want to spend up elsewhere, though. I think there's an argument to be made that, you can get into LaShawn McCoy and make him your number 1 in cash and not spend up for Johnson or Bell. There's an option there. I think that you can make it work. You have to figure out your wide receiver core then, which we can do in the next video. But I think there's an argument there that you go for LaShawn McCoy, and then you can build around. So those are the 3 elite cash guys. I also love Carlos Hyde in cash. Honestly, I know he hasn't really had a cash profile because of the receptions aren't really there. But we've talked about this Atlanta defense being so soft, and they're softest to the run. And, lost in the historic measures of Bell last week is the fact that, this guy had 200 total yards against the Jets, a team that's actually been respectable. I think the Jets were allowing the 7th fewest rushing yards, before last week. And now it's down to 18th just because, they got ran all over 193 yards by Hyde. I think the volume will be there for Hyde. And Chip Kelly has shown a penchant to continue running even when down. So I don't think game script or game flow with a 13-point underdog is as scary for a San Francisco back as it is for a traditional NFL coach, because we know Chip Kelly is not a traditional NFL coach. And then the other one, honestly, is just going to Lamar Miller in cash. I know he's done most of his damage against the Colts this year, but the thing is I think the floor is actually pretty high, because the touches are still there. He's had some issues with injuries, but he continues to get the ball. So I think he's got a 16, 17-point floor. Are you bold enough to go cash with Kenneth Farrow, or who are your cash guys?
Yeah, I like Farrow a lot. I think he's going to see volume for sure.
I do too. I
The question,
don't buy the Hillman thing because it's Ronnie Hillman.
yeah, yeah, I agree with you there. Would I like to find a different way to do it? Yes. I mean, I think I'm more comfortable with like Rashard Matthews as one of my receivers than I am starting Farrow in cash, just
Right.
because there are other backs that I think are in pretty much can't flop situation. I actually think running back is really deep this week.
It's a great week.
I know you want to start off a cash lineup with Bell or Johnson, and honestly, I'm not going to feel comfortable without him. But the idea of either LaShawn McCoy or Zeke Elliott as my top back does not scare me at all either. I mean, for tournaments, I'll probably have lineups where I have either neither, or I have one of them with Zeke and one of them with McCoy, or maybe even McCoy and Zeke, because I like that whole tier.
What about Atlanta?
Yeah. That was what I was getting to after that. I mean, after Zeke, who I think, the weakness in the Tampa Bay defense is the rush defense. And, even in a bad week last week, had 100 yards rushing.
Right.
So I think, he could be 102 touchdowns this week and, every bit as good as Bell or Johnson. Atlanta, yeah, I like Devontae Freeman. I mean, I'm not buying the Tevin Coleman last week. He still only touched the ball 10 times. I mean, meanwhile, Freeman touched it, 8 times, 6 rushes for 6 yards. I think that was just an outlier performance. You look back-to-back 20-point performances before that on 16 and 15 carries, scored 2 rushing touchdowns, and each was involved in the passing game. And now we're talking 49ers. I think if you use Tevin Coleman, you're kind of playing yesterday fantasy sports, going back and just looking for those scores last week. Now, is there a scenario where he does score? Definitely. I mean, is there a scenario where they get up big and just, stop using Freeman? Definitely. But I think Freeman's going to be part of their scoring. I think he's pretty much a lock to score a touchdown this week. And the other guy I really, really, really like, I like Hyde, by the way. I really like that call. But LeGarrette Blount, if I'm going cheaper, against Denver, I think that when you look at the way to beat this Denver team, clearly number one in pass defense, allowed the fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks. They've got those dominant corners. I know Malcolm Mitchell's been playing good football, but the way to beat them is via the run. They're 26th in rushing DVOA, and LeGarrette Blount's gone at least 100 yards or a touchdown in all but 2 games this year. So he's not a guy who really feels safe with his skill set, but he has been, and he's going to be in this matchup. I mean, you're kind of throwing into a brick wall. So I think Belichick is going to understand that, and he's going to use Blount. I think we see 20-plus carries this week with the goal line work. I think you get 100 and a touchdown from Blount at 5,000, which is why I would much rather go with him, who I think is, definitely going to get the touches, than Farrow, who there's a scenario where, he gets vultured or, someone else gets a hot hand, something like that. I feel more comfortable with in cash. Let's go to tournaments. Do you want to start us off with Farrow in tournaments? Because I think you got to have shares of him.
Yeah, that's actually where I'm more comfortable. That's why I was asking you about him. There's talk like Michael Gelkin of the San Diego Union Tribune. He's a great beat writer because a lot of time he writes to the fantasy narrative, which means he divulges kind of the breakdown information that we all chase, right? I mean, he basically says there could be some semblance of a platoon, but I think that's loosely used because the idea that Rivers got hit so much last week. And a lot of that was on, obviously third downs. So there's some fear that Farrow isn't ready for pass pro. I do think you could lose, obviously, some of the receptions. I don't think we're going to see Farrow get 6 receptions, but I also don't, I also think this is a game with such a nice point total and a back and forth kind of script that I do think Farrow will be busy. And I think 15 touches is kind of safe. So yeah, the upside there, and also just the upside of being San Diego's running, goal line running back has its own merits. We know that. We've seen games this year where, I'm not comparing him to Melvin Gordon skill set wise, but just usage wise. We've seen games where Melvin Gordon, only had 80, 90 total yards, but could knock in 2 touchdowns, and it's still kind of a slate shifting kind of performance, and it still helps you in tournaments. So that's my pitch for Farrow, is the fact that the Raiders are, I think, 5th worst against the run in terms of yards allowed. I think they've allowed the second or third most yards per carry. They've allowed like 4.7 yards per carry, so to backs. So it's not particularly tough. We think of them as an emerging defense, but they don't have run stuffers either. I mean, Mack is an edge menace, and linebacker wise, they kind of have a patchwork rotation there, like Perry Riley and stuff. So, that's the pitch for Farrow, is just multi touchdown upside. And most of the times when you're going below 5,000, you don't have a guy who consolidates goal line carries like this and have 15 touches. So that's the selling point for him. I think there's some other upside guys. We got to talk about Bilal Powell. Assuming Matt Forte isn't able to play here, Miami isn't good against the run. That's where you beat this team as well, right? And they have a good pass rush, and I just think Powell has that awesome kind of fantasy upside with the receptions. He could have an ugly game on the ground and still have 8 or 9 receptions. We've seen that happen with them, especially with Petty kind of going a lot shorter than Fitzpatrick was. It's a lot of check down stuff. And just, riding the hot hand. I mean, you got guys like Todd Bowles here trying to save their jobs. I think, riding their best playmaker. And Powell is making an argument as their best, all-purpose back anyway, really. But it all depends on Forte being ruled out. But I think Powell's a guy in tournaments that I really like. And then on the other side of all that is Latavius Murray actually has multi-touchdown upside as well. And he's still cheap. He doesn't have the receiving profile either, but he's not him and Powell together are you're spending less than 11 grand with them as a backfield. And I think there is a way that you strike it rich with those guys. I still think one of them will probably be a flex, but they're interesting. And I actually consider, the running backs for I actually still consider Kenneth Dixon kind of a tournament guy. He's still just so cheap on DraftKings, 3,800. The price didn't reflect that usage last week. I know that he's kind of one of these guys like Dion Lewis that fantasy people keep saying it's coming, the breakout's coming. Last week was kind of the breakout, right? 60% snap rate, 11 targets. That's a ton of targets. I don't think game script works that way where they have to pass that much, but Flacco only passes underneath. Also, the Eagles create a lot of pressure. They're not a great defense, but they create a lot of pressure, and I think that could lead to a lot of dump-offs. So, I mean, the more important fact is that in crucial moments, Dixon was out snapping and out touching West. So at 3,800, I think he has that 22-point ceiling that you want when you're paying under $4,000. So who do you like in tournaments?
Yeah, Dixon, Lamar Miller are guys you have already mentioned that I just want to, re-emphasize or emphasize that I'm on. I mean, yes, last week was the breakout and, it was mostly because of the passing game, but we love passing game backs here. And the fact that he still carried over 10 times for the second time in 3 weeks, I mean, there's enough volume there that, he could even break a long one, even if his catches reduced to 4 or 5 this week. So there are a lot of ways for him to get it done. Lamar Miller against Jacksonville. I know Jacksonville's corners have been pretty good, so I expect them to kind of limit the receivers, and that means a lot of Lamar Miller. All right, some guys that you didn't touch on that I definitely want to touch on. Let's start with Isaiah Crowell. It's funny. Everyone last week was on Le'Veon Bell. I mean, he was 50% owned against this Buffalo defense. Isaiah Crowell runs for 100 yards, and I don't think you've heard a lot of Isaiah Crowell talk this week. 100 yards last week, plus the defense that just gave up ridiculous production to Le'Veon Bell. That's been a bad rushing defense. This is a good situation for him. 4,100 on DraftKings. We were talking about Dixon at 3,800, Farrell's 4,400. So Crowell's even cheaper. And that's definitely a guy I will want some shares of there. And I think people are kind of underestimating the situation that TJ Yeldon's in. He's another guy who's kind of a receiving back. He's kind of a Kenneth Dixon-ish, but nowhere near as good of a runner. But if Chris Ivory remains out, I mean, this is a guy who's seeing a ton of volume.
I think he says 20. I think he averages like 20.9 touches per game with Ivory out. So volume's there.
Yeah. Exactly. For 4,100 against Houston, who's a great, secondary this year. They've got guys like Bouye and Joseph and guys that are standing out.
They're kind of like Denver, right? They're great against the pass and they're soft in the middle.
Exactly. I mean, that definitely presents an opportunity that I want to take advantage of there. So I am definitely circling that one. And then the last one that I'm kind of looking to is DeMarco Murray against Kansas City. I mean, right. Kansas City is not a great rushing defense. I mean, 19th against the pass. I know they've been a good overall team this year, but that has been a way to beat this defense. And DeMarco Murray, at 6,900 is kind of in that forgotten space at running back this week. I think people either want, the top 4 guys, or they want to go down to the guys we've been talking about in save. So I think DeMarco Murray, might have literally a 2% ownership this week. And those are the weeks you want to have DeMarco Murray. I really want a lot of him this week because I think people are going to way overlook him. And that's a little scary. And the last guy is LaShawn McCoy, who you kind of already mentioned. Every week I mention those Tyrod McCoy stacks that people seem to, overlook. But if this Buffalo offense is going to get it done this week, they're both going to be a part of it. There's certainly a scenario where Tyrod throws a pass to McCoy that goes to the end zone. So I like both of those guys. Do we miss anything at running back?
No, I think we covered it. I think it's a big spectrum of options that you have here at running back. I think it's smart to be creative, and I think it's a flex week for running back. I think there's enough value, like we mentioned, that it's a week to get. We've had weeks where receivers earn the flex. I think this is a week where running backs, especially with all these cheaper guys getting plus touches, the Dixons, the Farrows, those guys, I think there's value there. Like even Yeldon, like there's value spending down at the flex.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize, I think if you're doing tournaments, you want a lot of Ezekiel Elliott, Devontae Freeman, and LeGarrette Blount shares. I just want to throw that out there. Those are the three guys that I know that I'm going to have a lot of tournament shares of, and even Carlos Hyde. We know about the top guys, but those are the guys I want to throw out there. Maybe there's guys that you just want to make sure people are.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Bilal Powell's a guy. I mean, you're going to want to. It's tough because confirmation wise, and it's the Saturday night thing, so it's not going to be in the bigger tournaments. But I just think there's a ton of upside there, total yardage wise. And then Hyde's still the guy. Hyde's the guy that I'm actually. He's one of the guys I'm interested in cash and tournaments. I just think 20 touches are there, and the price point really hasn't reflected yet, his recent success.
There you go. There is an overview of who we like in tournaments. We already went over cash. So that is all for us for running backs this week. But before we go, Big Game 51, just want to remind you, rotocurve.com/big-game. Win free tickets plus fan experience events, 4-night trip, upgraded seats, VIP tickets to that celeb game, and much, much more. Check it out, rotocurve.com/big-game. We will be back with me mispronouncing more names, probably calling them NBA players in the wide receiver section.